Hello, this is Andy Vining again, reading My Mother's Diaries. I'm starting this episode with something a bit different, because I'm delighted to welcome Sienna Home Care as a founding sponsor, supporter and listener to My Mother's Diaries. Sienna Home Care supported my wife Val during her illness in 2023 and helped us through one of the most difficult periods of our lives. Their kindness, care and practical support meant a great deal to both of us. As you may know, I'm getting on in years now, 83, and Sienna Home Care's manager, Emma Parsons, still pops in from time to time to see how I am, which I greatly appreciate. And it is so kind of the company that they've chosen to assist me to produce this weekly podcast, as they realise that a great many of my listeners are at an age where they may be thinking about care for themselves or their nearest and dearest at home. And in my experience, Sienna Home Care are the best there is. They can be contacted on www.siennahomecare.com or email info@siennahomecare.com. And of course, you can always telephone them 02382 123300. 02382 123300. And then again, before we move into July and August 1951, I want to put things into context that you, my listeners, may have forgotten. Before we begin the July and August of 1951, it's worth remembering that everything you've heard so far over the last 3 years, and the next 3 years on My Mother's Diaries, took place before electricity even reached Hiltonbury Farm. That was on the 14th of February 1954. Try to imagine running a large farmhouse, raising 4 children, helping with a busy working farm, without electric lights, a fridge, washing machine, vacuum cleaner or electric cooker. After dark, the rooms were lit by candles, oil lamps and caligas. Their glow was warm but limited, leaving much of the house in shadow. The lamps had to be filled, cleaned and lit, and a draught could make the flames flicker or go out. Mother sewed, knitted, darned and mended beneath those lights. She made clothes for the 4 children, altered clothes, repaired sheets and socks, and at the end of each long day wrote her diary by candlelight, or lamplight, of course. All the washing was done by hand. Water had to be heated, clothes and bedding scrubbed and rinsed, then put through a mangle before being carried outside, and then when it rained, the washing hung around in the kitchen, slowly drying above the fire. Heavy flat irons were heated on the kitchen range and replaced as they cooled, yet Mother often recorded, in only a few words, that she'd completed a large wash and iron throughout the afternoon and evening. Cooking depended on the solid fuel range or caligas fires that had to be laid and kept burning, while water for washing, cleaning and bathing the children had to be heated and carried by hand. Without a refrigerator, milk, meat, eggs, butter, fruit and vegetables had to be used quickly and carefully, of course, but often preserved. Mother spent hours making jam, bottling fruit, salting beans and storing whatever the garden had produced. Even the cows were milked without electric light. During dark mornings and evenings, the sheds were illuminated by hissing tilly lamps, while the men worked among large animals and moving machinery. Animals still had to be fed, calves cared for, eggs collected, chickens moved, hens laying eggs, hay had to be gathered before the rain arrived, and harvest could not wait because everyone was tired. Alongside all of this, Mother taught dancing, cycled to the village, cared for the children, welcomed a constant stream of visitors, and somehow always found time to record her diary every day. What is most remarkable is that she never complained. She simply noted what had happened and quietly carried on with whatever needed doing next. So, as we enter the July and August of 1951, picture Mother sitting at the kitchen table after the children had settled and the day's work was finally over, a candle flickering beside her while the farmyard beyond the windows lay in darkness. Then, tired but without complaint, she opened a diary and wrote down another day in the life of Hiltonbury Farm. And so we begin July 1951. This began with Hiltonbury feeling strangely quiet. Janet had gone out with the Deans, Andrew was away at school. Norman telephoned to ask John if he would go to Cambridge with him. They left at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I remember thinking how funny the house seemed with everyone away. Hiltonbury was rarely silent. There was usually a child running through the passage, a cow calling from the yard, hens scratching outside, or someone arriving for a cup of tea. With John gone, the whole place felt rather empty. The weather was hot. I was up early as usual, managed to wash and iron before tea. Then Bet and Fred came to supper, and John telephoned me from Cambridge. He was having a great time with Norman up there. The next day was still hot, although there was a little more breeze. Bet walked up with Timothy and stayed to tea. Joan called in, and Wyn and Frank came in later, and John phoned me again. A little rain fell before he returned, and the men managed to gather some hay in the evening. A little rain fell before he returned, and the men managed to gather some hay in the evening. As soon as John was home, he was busy again, picking up hay at Flexford. Joan and Lorna brought their dogs over for a walk, and somehow the dogs got merry on cider. It was one of those ridiculous little incidents that seemed worth putting in the diary. By the end of the week, John had finished the hay at Flexford. I cooked for Sunday and spent the evening weeding the front path. On Saturday, we watched the King's Road sports on the cricket field, played tennis at Chalks, and ended with the Beatons and Deans coming in for a cuppa. And the following day was one of the happiest days of the summer. John fetched Andrew and his two school friends, Mike and Richard Hughes, from St. Probus for the day. We had a wonderful lunch, and then in the afternoon we had picnic in the field, and the Deans came up to play cricket. For a few hours, the working field became our own cricket ground, full of boys, laughter, and badly aimed cricket balls. That evening, we drove the boys back to school. It was a pleasant ride, although the house felt much emptier once Andrew had gone. The weather then turned showery, but the farm and garden needed some rain, and I picked strawberries and raspberries, deadheaded roses, and continued with dancing practice at school. But there was still time for tennis, a visit to the hairdressers, and a party at the Beatons, although we came home early because of the children. Then came Andrew's sports day in Salisbury. We left after lunch, but arrived rather late because the car wouldn't go properly. Fortunately, we reached the school in time to see Andrew win the wheelbarrow race. John and I entered the parents' race, and we won that too. I don't know whether Andrew was proud or embarrassed, but we were rather pleased with ourselves, John and I. The next day was Anne Miller's birthday, but I picked raspberries, and then I went to Highcliffe with the Deans. It was too chilly for the beach, so we had tea in the forest, and later we went to Fleming Park, down in Eastleigh, where John's Uncle Ern was playing in the band. The children's summer was becoming very busy now. I took Janet, Jennifer, and Heather to the circus, where there was music, sawdust, and all the excitement of a proper travelling show. The following day brought a very different outing. I went by coach to London with the Deans and Bunty to visit the Ford Works in Dagenham. We travelled after the coach up the River Thames in a ferry and met Bob at the factory. The buildings and machinery were enormous, and the factory was just an amazing place to visit. Afterwards, we went to London's Empress Hall to see London Melody, a great live entertainment spectacle performed in the huge ice arena. The show featured the famous skater Belita, together with singers, dancers, and comedy from the young Norman Wisdom. With music, colourful costumes, and performers sweeping across the ice, it was a wonderful, wonderful sight. After the noise and machinery of the Ford's works, it made a splendid evening to the outing. It was altogether a very nice day. Then, back at Hiltonbury, the fruit and vegetables were arriving faster than we could use them. I made 8 pounds of raspberry jam and picked 4 buckets of peas. On the same day, the milking machine went wrong. A failed milking machine was no small matter. Cows still have to be milked at the proper time, whether the machinery worked or not. But the men got it running again, thankfully, which was a great relief. The next day was Bet's birthday. I collected 24 pounds of cherries from Paisley's and bottled them that afternoon. The kitchen must have been unbearably hot, but that evening we still had an American supper with the Deans, Parkers, Beatons, Bob, Bunty, Bet, Fred, Everybody bought food, and the table was a great sight, laden with a wonderful food evening. The hot weather continued. Heather and I had tea on the front lawn, while Bob and his family picked some peas. Then came a tremendous thunderstorm. The rain fell so heavily that the duck pond filled completely in only 2 hours. After weeks of watching the skies and worrying about dry ground, the water suddenly came down faster than the fields could take it. The ducks, of course, were delighted. There were more raspberries and blackcurrants to pick, while John fitted farm surveys, cricket and tennis around all the work. The hay was cut in the front field, and I went to the Lyndhurst show when the weather was just right. The next day we made an early start for the Jersey sale in Salisbury. John studied the cattle carefully and bought a Jersey heifer. A good heifer represented the future of the herd. Her breeding, health and possible milk yield all mattered, and she might remain on the farm for many years. After the sale, we collected Andrew from school and bought him new clothes at Whaley's. And by the end of July, John had begun cutting the first oats at Flexford. We had a picnic with the Coates, Julie Richards and the Basie girls, but another huge storm arrived again in the evening. Then August began with roses, peas and yet more rain. I visited Hilliers and Rogers with Joan and the Deans to see the roses, then spent the following days gardening and painting the front windows. The children were mucking out the stable, and Mother wrote simply, "They smell." I don't know if she meant the children or the stables. Jennifer then went to the Hursley Hunt Gymkhana at Romsey, although it rained for most of the afternoon and she got soaking wet, but she didn't seem to mind. Soon afterwards, Auntie Ag became seriously ill, and unfortunately she passed away while living in Hursley. But there was little time to stop. Jennifer's clothes and belongings had to be prepared for the Pony Club camp, and on Julie's birthday she left for Hursley Park. John, Janet, Andrew and I went to Shaftesbury Market with the Dunfords. It was a lovely spot, and we enjoyed it very much. Meanwhile, John had started cutting the rye, and then came the event that became the saddest memory of the summer. One of the cows, Emblem, gave birth to a heifer calf. At first it should have been a very happy occasion. A newborn calf always brought excitement to the farm. The children wanted to see it, and everyone watched as it made those first uncertain attempts to stand. A young calf seems to be made entirely of legs. It slips, struggles and tries again until at last it finds its balance. But poor Emblem was not well. She went down with milk fever, and milk fever can come on very quickly after calving. A cow that had appeared strong would suddenly become weak, unsteady and unable to rise. It was frightening to see such a large animal lying helplessly. We called the vet and hoped that the cow would respond to treatment. The following day I went to Hursley Church with Toss and George, while Guppy, Den Guppy, took Andrew out for the day. I walked round to Mother's with Denny and Heather, but Emblem was still no better. We had to call the vet again, and sometimes a cow with milk fever could recover remarkably quickly once treated, and we hoped that that would be the case. But on Monday morning, Bill Wren, our cowman, found Emblem dead in her stall. It was a terrible loss. Every good cow is valuable, of course, but that was not all. Emblem was part of the herd, known by name and character. She'd been milked, fed and cared for every day. And only 2 days earlier she'd produced a heifer calf. Now the little calf was left without its mother. John and I went to Winchester with the calf, and it was taken later to Hursley, to Norman Cooper's, where it would be fed and looked after, because Norman had arranged this for it. There was no time for the farm to stop. That same day, John cut the oats in the factory field. The following morning he was cutting wheat at Flexford. Joan and Julie Totten came to tea, and when Wynne arrived, we all walked over to the harvest field. The sight of the harvest in full swing is always impressive. The machinery, with Freddie Freeborn, the contractor, working the combine, moving steadily through the corn. The men working against the weather, and every knew that one heavy shower could delay everything again. I helped pick up the boats at Flexford, while John cut, thrashed and carted whenever the ground was dry enough. Jennifer returned from camp bringing a mountain of washing. Another cow, Cantley Romany, produced a heifer calf, which was especially welcome after the loss of Emblem. Then came a smaller but equally carefully recorded farming milestone. One of our new Moran hens laid her first egg, the first of many, I hope. The day became a constant battle between harvest and weather. John thrashed oats and picked up rye, then the showers returned and he began carting wheat whenever he could. Some days were fine, but the ground remained too wet for harvesting on others. On one of those days, Wynne and I went to the pictures to see Danny Kaye, while Andrew went to stay with the Inges. When the weather improved, the rye was thrashed, hay was baled, and wheat was gathered at Flexford, sometimes late into the evening. I continued painting the bedroom windows while John was too busy even to go to the village. Eventually he finished the thrashing. The weather was still too wet for tennis, so we played table tennis with the Deans instead. One rough and showery Sunday, Mother, Bella, Flo all came to tea, and Les Beaton repaired the harrows up in the yard which were broken and would be needed for the autumn cultivations. But a big worry was wasps. There seemed to be swarms of them everywhere. We eventually destroyed 2 nests. A few days later, Janet was stung by a wasp on her bum, which caused a great deal of noise and laughter. Very little sympathy from the other children when they heard where she had been stung. That same day brought more serious news. 4 of our cows had failed the TT test. Any failed herd test was worrying, and it could mean further examinations, restrictions, or animals having to be removed and put down. It's always down to the badgers, though. Badgers, they are such a terrible nuisance on a farm. Rain continued to interrupt the summer. On one thoroughly rotten day with nothing but rain, I took our children, Carol and Richard Lister, to see Walt Disney's new film Alice in Wonderland. We had to queue for an hour, but it was a good film, and the children just loved Alice, the White Rabbit, the Mad Hatter, and the Queen of Hearts. Then, near the month's end, I went round to the locomotive works in Eastleigh with Crossy. That was really interesting as well, although the rain poured down all day. The final day of August began fine but turned wet later. Joan came to tea, and afterwards we walked over to Flexford. Cross and Den took the children to see another farm in Eastleigh, which had cattle and some goats on it. And so the summer drew to a close. The children had enjoyed picnics, cricket, the circus, sports day, pony club camp, the cinema, and visits to shows and markets. The farm had welcomed a new Jersey heifer, Cantley Romany's calf, and the Morans' first eggs. The oats, rye, wheat had been cut, turned, thrashed, baled, and gathered whenever the weather allowed. The kitchen had been filled with raspberries, blackcurrants, peas, cherries, and jam. Clothes had been washed and ironed, windows painted, visitors fed, and endless cups of tea made. But the memory that remained above all others was Emblem. Farming brings life and death very close together. One day we could watch a calf struggle to its feet, and 2 days later we could stand beside an empty stall. Still, there was little time to grieve. The cows still needed milking, the harvest still had to be gathered, and the children still needed feeding. So we carried on. That was life at Hiltonbury in July and August 1951, full of hard work, family outings, laughter, and summer visitors, but also the quiet sadness of losing one good cow whose name was never forgotten, Emblem. Thank you for listening to my mother's diaries.